Thrilled to be with you folks. It's Tuesday, March 17th. And time marches on. Let's start with a question sent to us by somebody actually who'd sent a question, I believe a week or two ago. But it was a two-part question, and there were so many questions sent that week that I thought we'd get to as many of the other readers' questions that week as we could, so I saved the second part of this question for tonight. As you know, as we talk about telling the truth about ourselves, I sometimes tend to emphasize the need for our talking about our mistakes, flaws, faults, fears, and so on. Although, of course, as we're telling the truth about ourselves, we can also talk about our successes. But, you know, we rarely get in trouble telling the truth about our mistakes. I mean, it's telling the truth about our successes that gets us imitation love. And so, you know, it's too easy to tell the truth about our successes. We get in trouble doing that. We tend to become addicted to imitation love, telling the truth about our successes. And so that's why I tend to talk about the need for our telling the truth about our faults and flaws, because it's that creates a sense of true intimacy. We've been tending to hide those all of our lives. And so we break out of our patterns of earning imitation love by talking about our faults. So some people are bothered by that, especially people who are familiar with the law of attraction. And here's one reader who writes and says, "Can you explain how talking about your faults will make them go away? I sometimes think if I focus on my faults so much that they will hang around me even more by the law of attraction. Do you know what I mean? The more I think about them, the more I attract them." And of course I know what you mean. If you sit around and say, "Oh, I'm such a terrible person. For example, if you talk about the fact that you are, let's say, a victim. If you, for example, sit around and go, "Oh, I'm such a victim. I'm such a terrible victim. Oh, woe is me. All I am is a victim. Oh," and you hang your head in your hands and that's all you talk about, well then, yeah, you're going to tend to attract more victimhood. That's true. You're right. There's something to the law of attraction. You do tend to attract what you focus on. And so when I talk about telling the truth about ourselves, I'm not talking about focusing on our flaws. Not at all. I'm simply talking about telling the truth and then being done with it. So, for example, in our conference calls, or when you're telling the truth to a wise person, what you do is you would say, earlier today, as I was interacting with whoever, I was a real victim in my interaction. Rather than simply tell the truth about what was going on, I said, "Oh, I couldn't help it," and I whined and I cried and I made excuses instead of simply telling the truth that I was irresponsible. There, see, that's not focusing on your flaws. That's just simply telling the truth about what you did. And then allowing the person that you're with in that moment to say, "Cool. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to see who you really are and what you really did." And then they might say to you, for example, "So what did you learn from that experience?" And then you might respond, "Well, I learned that when I acted like a victim, I didn't feel connected to that person at all. I felt like I was lying and hiding. I disappeared. I became invisible. I became nothing but a ball of protection and keeping myself away from that person. As opposed to now, when I'm telling the truth, I feel connected to you. I'm hiding in no way. I'm being honest and open and genuine." So when I feel like that, connected and honest, I don't feel like acting like a victim. I'm not feeling like a victim with you now, which is delightful. I feel happier. And so if I can remember this feeling of connectedness with you, I will be less likely in a similar circumstance to resort to victimhood the next time. So notice that in that entire interchange, you talk about your faults for a moment in time, just long enough to learn from it, to feel connected to another person, and to formulate a plan so that you would be less likely to exhibit the same fault the next time. So, by briefly mentioning your fault, it makes it much less likely that you would exhibit the same fault the next time. Why? Because you feel more loved, and the more loved you feel, the less likely you are to repeat the same pattern. Now that you've talked about your fault, you can establish a plan for not repeating the fault, whereas by hiding the fault, you feel less loved and more likely to repeat the fault. In fact, that's one thing that I find to be an enormous flaw in what some people misunderstand to be the law of attraction, and that is that some people believe that the law of attraction is that, well, if I'll just pretend, and I'll just sit around and pretend that everything's positive, I'll cover up my flaws, and I'll just say, I'll ignore them, I'll lie about them, and I'll just say everything is positive, everything in my life is perfect as it is, and I hear that a lot. Everything about me is perfect. Oh no, actually it's not. You have terrible relationships, your children hate you, you have a terrible marriage. You think you can make all that go away by saying everything's perfect in your life? It's as it should be? You think you can change that just with a mantra? Just with something you're going to say? Who are you kidding? So you can't just sit around and say everything is wonderful and then you will just attract wonderfulness. No, you can't do that. You attract wonderfulness by saying what you want. And what you want starts with telling the truth about what is. So everything wonderful in life begins with telling the truth. There isn't a single wonderful thing in the universe that isn't based on the truth. So, there you go. That's how telling the truth about our faults helps make them go away. It's just everything is about the truth. Can't lie your way to happiness. Can't be done. Here's somebody who says, I've had a couple of experiences where I have witnessed my husband severely reprimanding our children, including spanking, slapping, and kicking, including just the other day. When I saw him kick our 6-year-old daughter, I became immediately angry with him and yelled at him to stop. I realized that was my mistake. It didn't help, only made things worse. Now, I'm sure that you, as well as many of those who are listening, when you hear, when you saw, or when you even think of yelling, slapping, and kicking, there's this tendency to have this enormous upwelling of righteous indignation. My goodness, there's an adult man slapping and kicking a child. Oh, well, then, you see, if there's something of sufficient wrong happening, then anything you do would be justified. Pull out a baseball bat, pull a gun and shoot him in the leg. We feel so justified in anything we do when somebody does something sufficiently wrong. Well, that's how wars start. See? Every war started on that basis. You hurt me badly, and so then I get to hurt you in return badly. I assure you, every war was on that basis. two people who felt sufficiently justified, and they ended up killing everybody. So we have to be pretty careful before we use the old "I was justified" routine in stopping somebody from doing anything. So let's think about this before we jump in, which is delightful. That's what you're doing here. You're asking, so what do I do here? Instead of just, feeling self-righteous and just stopping him. So we have a tendency, especially, to feel justified in leaping in and rescuing children who are being attacked. Now notice that I didn't say children who are being abused. I just said children who are being attacked. And I didn't say the word abused because we just get all fired up about that word abused. And I hear it all the time. I was abused. We love that word because we wear it like a little badge. I see people everywhere I go, at 12-step meetings, in group therapy, and so on, and you can almost just see it. It's like they reach over in their pocket, they flip a little switch, and the little embedded neon sign in their forehead goes on, being abused. They love it. They love to declare to everybody around them, I was abused. Well, you really weren't. Somebody may have attacked you, but you weren't abused implies that somehow somebody intentionally tried to hurt you. And that's just pretty rarely the case. What happened is that somebody who was empty and afraid, somebody who was just as wounded as you, listen carefully, just as wounded as you, and drowning, was trying to keep their own head above water. And in the process of trying to survive, as they were lashing out and simply trying to keep their own head above water, in the process of splashing, they affected you. It wasn't about you. We all think that we're incredibly important, and it's a false sense of self-importance. Now, I'm not denying that you, now in this case, when I'm using the term you, is meaning all of us who are listening. I'm not denying that we didn't get hurt. Yeah, but most of the pain we feel is a result of our own willingness to be offended. So, in this case here, here's your husband who's empty and afraid, and he's lashing out in his anger because he's feeling helpless and lost, and he's lashing out at your daughter. We want to rush in and do something, but why? Well, partly you want to defend your daughter, which is good, that you want to keep her from being unnecessarily hurt. But part of the reason that we want to rush in and save a child is for ourselves. We've all been hurt many times in our lives, and when we see somebody hurting somebody else, part of us wants to rush in and save that person because, in a way, we're saving us. We're vicariously, as we save that helpless person, we're vicariously saving ourselves. Something that I talk about in Real Love and Freedom for the Soul. It's called the vicarious victim. We are vicariously saving us. It's as though that person is us. And so we're going in, and nobody ever saved us. And so here's an opportunity to go in and save that poor helpless person like nobody ever did for us. And it makes us feel really good. We just love it. So we just want to beat the trash out of this person who's hurting that poor helpless person. Which is, the reason that we like watching the Rambo movies and a lot of other violent movies, where the bad guy just gets beaten to a pulp, because it's like, we always wanted to see the bad guy who hurt us beaten to a pulp. The vicarious victim. But we have to remember what's going on here with the attacker and why he's attacking. And wait and talk about what's happening. So we got to get to the bottom of this and understand everything that's going on before we leap in and kill people and make everything worse. So we're going to get to that in a second. You continue. The next day, you said, I entered the room and noticed the same daughter looking teary-eyed, and when I asked why, he answered that he had to smack her, this is your husband, because she was ignoring him. Now, anybody in real love knows this is insane. I mean, an adult man had to hit a child because she was ignoring him. This is pitiable. But see, people who don't understand real love would be thinking, oh, what a monstrous fellow. We need to put him in jail. No, we'll get to solutions here in a minute. I chose not to get angry because I knew it wouldn't help. Well, bless your heart. I looked at my daughter's hand and saw that it was bright red with his handprint visible. Yeah, he must have hit her pretty hard. And, some people would be saying, oh, well then let's get out the camera and take pictures so we can, take him up before Family and Child Services. Oh, let's calm down before we do that. I invited her to come with me and we left the room. I grabbed an ice pack for her hand and we went into her room. I didn't know the best thing to do or say to her or to him. So my questions would be, we've got two parents. Parent A trying to learn to love and teach children the real love way. And parent B is attacking the children, yelling, spanking, slapping, kicking. So what are some ways that parent A could still show love to parent B, and what would be the appropriate explanation to the children about this treatment? So I love how calm you are about this. It's going to be easier to understand the husband as pretty much another child, because he is. So really we have, instead of parent A and parent B, we have one parent and child A and child B. We've got two empty and afraid people. One of them's just way bigger. So your husband is empty and afraid, and your child is now terrified, being, bullied by this great big kid. And it's about understanding what's going on. So interfering and stopping him while this is going on, you have wisely observed, is almost never going to be productive. Now, if he's got a baseball bat raised to your child's head, yeah, I would do something. Then I would come in the room and say, could we go into the next room? And then I would interfere. But rather than run in screaming and grabbing him by the hair, I would say, could we speak? Which is, most of the time works better than screaming at him. So I would interfere then. But on the whole, you wait till it's over, and then you go into that. And you usually wait for, a while before you talk about it. And so you talk to him and you say, I noticed that you were having a hard time with Susie, the little girl. And I know that what you want to do is to love her, but I noticed that it wasn't going very well. So what was going on with you? And he says, well, she was ignoring me. And you express understanding with him. And, I know that sometimes she does ignore you. And that must be very frustrating for you. And so then you go through with him, and, eventually you're going to be reading the parenting book with him. You go through with him and you say, so how is it working what you're doing now? And show him that his yelling at her and slapping her is not working out very well. And you explain to him that he's dealing with a 6-year-old child who needs more than anything on the planet to feel unconditionally loved. And you explain to him that the instant either of you raises your voice with the 6-year-old child, the only thing the child hears is, I don't love you, and immediately goes into frightened withdrawal. So you have to explain to him that anything other than unconditional love with this child is never going to work. And you have to start explaining to him, like right now, you have to start explaining to him that any kind of anger, any kind of physicality, hitting anything, is completely unacceptable. It can't happen. You bring up to him, for example, the fact that he's hit her and that there was a mark on her, and you say, I understand why you get angry. And then you explain to him why he gets angry. That he gets angry because he doesn't feel unconditionally loved. You're going to be giving him an entire crash course in real love. This is all going to happen in, under 10 minutes. The entire explanation. The whole deal. And you explain to him that even though you understand that he gets frustrated and that he's not feeling loved himself, you're going to do the best you can to support him. But in those moments when he gets angry and he hits her, it is destroying her. It's leaving marks on her on the inside that are, in some cases, unrecoverable in some kids. And that in a single moment of temper, he could not only leave a mark on her, but he could leave bruises and broken bones. That little bruise, that little mark on her hand could very easily have led to, for example, a broken bone that would lead to her being removed from the home. So a full-grown man like myself can easily break a child's hand, can cripple a child. And I worked in emergency rooms for 6 years. And I saw a guy who lashed out at his 1-year-old child, and he didn't mean to do it. He didn't hit the child all that hard. I could tell because of other evidence on the child. But he was wearing a ring, and the ring thumped this little kid on the head and caused a subdural hematoma, and he killed his child. We big guys just don't realize what it takes. So you've got to explain to him that when he gets angry like that you have to do something. And so you're going to be talking to him like this every single time he gets angry at her. Every time. And that's a commitment that you have to be willing to make so that this stops. Then you have to be willing to make a commitment that you will talk to him about the principles that are found in Real Love and Marriage. That you're going to sit down with him and talk to him about the principles that are in Real Love and Parenting. You have to be willing to make a commitment to yourself that the kind of anger that's going on in your household will not continue. Period. Now, you're not going to, hit him or anything like that, but it would be better that you didn't have him in the household, that he wasn't there, than that you continue to have him there doing this to your child. And so it goes like this. When he behaves like this, you will talk to him each time. You'll talk to him lovingly, but if you talk to him every time he behaves like this, one of two things will happen. Either he will feel loved by you and feel the guidance that you give him, and eventually his behavior will change because you're both loving and teaching him, or he will find what you're telling him so crazy and irritating that he'll leave. One of the two will happen, and either way you'll win. See the point? So it's pretty important that you get this. That you not just sit by while this is going on in your household, and that you actually do something about it. So you have to be willing to make a commitment that you're willing to do whatever it takes to bring real love into your household, whatever the cost. Even if that means that it irritates your husband who is hurting your child, and that might even lead to his leaving. But do you want this to keep happening to your child? Because the scars that are presently being inflicted on your child could be, in some cases, mortal. It's that important. Here's somebody who says, I've recently discovered that when I'm around anyone that's yelling, even if they're just playing around, I quickly empty out. What is the most loving way to handle this, besides just walking out of the room? Well, it's understandable that you would react that way. You probably have had, well, not probably, it's obvious, actually, that you've had a lot of experience in your life with people who have not been loving toward you. And when you hear yelling, that taps into the old wounds that you've received, and you hate it. So when you hear the yelling, you feel those old wounds, and you feel unloved again. Who inflicted the wounds? I don't know, but you feel them again, and it bothers you. So, one solution, obviously, is to get enough real love to where yelling doesn't bother you, and eventually, if you feel loved enough, when you hear yelling, it really won't bother you. No kidding. When I hear yelling now, it just doesn't bother me because I know it's not about me. Just like when people cut me off and when they're driving, that used to just make me crazy. And now when people cut me off, it's like, they must be pretty selfish and think they're very important people. So it doesn't bother me. But to answer your question, in the short term, what do? It depends on who it is. As usual, in any given situation or with any given person, we always have three choices. So you can live with the pig and like it, live with the pig and hate it, or leave the pig. Living with the pig and hating it, staying with somebody who's yelling and hating it, that's intolerable. So you don't want to make that choice. So you can leave or stay with it and like it. Staying with it we'll get to stay with it and like it in a second. If it's with a stranger, if it was somebody you don't know, you're pretty much stuck with leaving it. So, if there's yelling and you don't know the person, usually leaving it is the best thing to do. And I'll tell you why in a second. And that's because the other choice is a variation on living with it and liking it. And by that I don't mean living with the yelling and liking the yelling, because you've already said it empties you out and you don't like it. But one thing, a variation on liking it, is learning to make a request. And that's making a loving request. So when you're with people that you know, you can actually say to them, this isn't your fault. It has nothing to do with you. But yelling bugs me. And it has to do with old wounds from childhood, whatever. That's not your fault, and it doesn't even matter what the old wounds are. But when I hear yelling, I empty out. I don't feel loved and loving anymore. So if you can live with this request, I do better when there isn't yelling. Now, I'm not telling you you have to stop. I'm just telling you that it's easier on me. So if you need to yell, not a problem. But I'm telling you that if there is yelling, then I would need to leave. So that's all. I'm making a request that you not yell, but I'm also saying, I'm also not, insisting on it, because if you need to yell and yelling's what you do, then hey, I can always go, and if I leave, I'm not stomping out in a huff. I'm just saying I can't be around it, and it's not your fault if I leave. It's my problem. I'm not loving enough to hang around. For example, I have a friend who is very intolerant toward unusual noises. Can't stand clicking pens, can't stand people tapping their feet, can't stand people chewing around him. He's picky about that. And so when I'm around him, knowing that about him, I'm willing to adapt to some things. I'm not willing to adapt to others. I'm not willing to change my entire being because he's kind of fruity about this. But, for example, if he's watching television and I want to be around him and, like, eat dinner, I may bring the food into the room and say, so would it bother you if I ate this while you're watching television? And we've known each other a long time. And so he will say, yeah, it would. Then I have to make a decision. And I don't feel pressured. I may make the decision that, I want to eat this while I'm watching that. In which case, I will do that. Now, he has to make a choice. He has to make the choice of, is he going to put up with that? Does he want to watch that bad enough? Or is he going to have to get up and go do something else until I'm done and then come back? Do you see? In real love, you don't feel forced to do stuff. You don't have to make compromises. You just make choices. You make your requests, you make your choices, you live with the consequences. Same thing with you. Next, reader or writer. Never quite know how to say that, since both are true. Last night I was trying to help my 8-year-old daughter from a previous marriage with her homework. My new husband stepped in and started correcting my daughter and rushing her to get finished because she was taking so long to get her homework done. He said she needs to do it fast, and he started to give her the answers. Well, I'm trying to ask her questions because I think it's important to help her think about the answers. I find that she really knows how to do it, but she wants to hang around and see if I'll do it for her. I also wanted her to learn that if she didn't get all her homework done in the amount of time given, that she would have to deal with the natural consequences of not turning in the completed assignment. And just a kind of a by the way, just one opinion. What you're doing is brilliant with her. If you simply give a child the answer, what do they learn? Nothing. And so here's your child sitting around hoping that you'll give her the answers, and if she hangs around long enough, she's going, well, Mom will do it for me. No, you require her to work out the answers. And if she hangs around long enough and doesn't get the homework done, well, then I'll be darned. She goes to school and doesn't have the homework done and has to live with whatever the consequences of that are. Eventually, she'll catch on and learn to do her homework in a shorter period of time. So what you're doing is not only helping her with her homework, you're teaching her a much more important principle, which is responsibility. Bless your heart. Great parenting. Then you said, I got irritated because he was doing it a different way. In the moment, I was not open to his ideas because I was already working with her. Later in the evening, he got upset with me and started verbally attacking me, saying that my daughter could be smart if I would do things his way. He said I was protecting her. And then he would argue with everything I said. I got irritated and couldn't hear him. So I told him that I was not loving enough to continue the conversation. He said, well, then we'll never have this conversation again. You do what you want with your daughter, but my kids will be different. And he has not spoken with me since last night. I recognized my mistakes and admitted them to him, that I was irritated, that I was not listening and not open to his ideas. What could I have done differently when he started correcting my daughter? How could I have loved my husband better in this situation? I now recognize that he was doing his best and only trying to help me with my daughter. I failed to see that in the moment. Well, you're kind of actually taking too much responsibility here. Yes, he may have been doing his best, but you're saying here that he was only trying to help me with my daughter. Well, I doubt that. It sounds like he was also trying to help himself, and by exercising power and taking over the situation and just correcting her and trying to be right and being very controlling. Now, what could you have done differently? So you are helping her first, and he came in and intruded and tried to take over the situation, which is very confusing to a kid. So it would have been very helpful in avoiding this entire situation with the child just by saying to him, Fred, and just ignoring homework for a moment and saying, Fred, could I talk to you for a second in the other room? Then going into the next room, listening entirely to his reasoning about how he was going to do the homework, or just simply saying, Fred, I'd be thrilled to hear everything that you want to say to Susie about how you want to help her with her homework, but it's very confusing to a kid to have two different approaches to the homework yammered in each ear while she's trying to do her homework. So we can talk about how your approaches about her homework on another occasion, but we can't do it while she's doing her homework, because that has a negative effect on the child. And I'm sure you'll agree that what we want here is a positive effect on her. So that's where you screwed up, was right off letting him continue while the child was there. It just confuses the trash out of the kid. So you excuse yourself, you talk to him, you don't have that whole thing with him. Then, if he gets mad and he doesn't agree with you, you say, well, okay, if you don't agree, then what are we going to do? You listen entirely to him about his approach to homework. You say, so how would you like to work this out? There are a lot of ways we could do this. You could do the homework with her the way you want to when you're helping her. Would that be one way? I could help her the way I help her when I help her. Just talk to him, just like that. Because what you say to him is, it's clear that we don't agree. But, so what is a solution? Like you say here, you continue and say, I feel I have to agree with him on everything in order for our relationship to be good. If I disagree with something, he argues with everything until I agree. And so what I've been doing is trying to stay quiet to avoid confrontation. Oh, honey, if you're avoiding confrontation in your relationship, you don't have a relationship with your own husband. What you have is a hostage situation. And you're just living a huge lie. That's awful. Agreeing with him is just stupid. You don't have a marriage. You're in prison. So you talk calmly. You don't get angry about anything, but you certainly don't agree if you don't. So let's say he states his position. It's important that you state right back to him what his position is. So your position is that it would be better to simply give her the answer and blah, blah, blah. You state his position clearly. And then he said, so then you say to him, is that your position? And he says, yes. And you say, okay, I clearly understand your position. And then you clearly state yours. And then make sure that he understands it. And then you say, I really understand what part of your position makes sense. And you say, that makes sense to me. And I just don't think that would work with her. So now, what's the solution that we can work on? How can we work this out so that we can teach her? And it may be that he just disagrees. And if he goes to pound his opinion back and you say, no. You see, with victims believe that if they state their opinion again, that somehow it makes them righter. You can't let victims do that. They think see what victims will do, they'll state their opinion 1,000 times. If you let them, he will state his opinion over and over. That's why conversations with victims go on and on and on. And if you let that happen, you are the idiot, and I don't feel sorry for you. So that's why you clearly state his opinion back to him. After you've done that, if he goes to state it again, you put your hand up and say, no, I got your opinion, didn't I? So I understand it. So we've got that. So what's the solution? How are we going to approach this with her? So will it be that you teach her your way on the times you talk to her, and I teach her my way and the times that I help her? What is the solution that we're going to arrive at? And if he says, well, now I believe, no, I already know what you believe. We've got that, and I know what I believe. So what are we going to do? And if he says, well, I don't know, then you propose a solution. And then if he says, well, I don't agree with that, you say, fine, then we're going to do what I propose until you come up with a better one. Because, see, victims are famous for this. They hate everything you propose, everything, but they don't have a better one. And so I actually love talking to victims, because then what I say to them is, not a problem. Then I propose we do this. And this is what we're going to do until you come up with a better one. And if you come up with a better one, I'm down with it. Then let's do that. But just hating mine isn't enough of a solution. Just saying I disagree with it, that's not a plan. It's kind of like politicians. Politicians come up with a plan for a thing, and then the rest of the country sits back and says, I hate that. And when people do that, I'm laughing. I understand you hate the president and you hate do you have a better plan? No. Well, then be quiet and support them. So do that. Listen to him carefully, propose a plan, and see what happens. But don't jump on the field of death with him and argue with him. He will argue you to death, as you've already discovered, so don't do it. This writer says, I teach history, and another teacher at my school is supposed to support me by giving me lesson resources and such. But she never does. She just says things like, teach slavery for a given course. She's been teaching for 30 years, so I know that she has the resources, but she never shares anything. Neither does anybody else in the department. It's quite frustrating, especially since I try to set an example myself by freely sharing any lesson ideas and other resources that I produce with others in the department. I feel annoyed at this history teacher who doesn't do her job, and that none of the other teachers then acknowledge in any way, not a thank you or anything, the work that I share with them. In the end, I feel that it is the kids who lose out when we don't share. When I came into teaching, I always had the idea that it would be great to work with others, to share ideas, and to work together on how we could do the best for the kids. But my experience has not always been that. Sometimes I feel it gets so petty with colleagues keeping ideas close to their chest as if it's some kind of competition as to who can deliver the best lesson. I can't understand why people won't share ideas if in the end that will result in a better learning experience for the students. Can you help me out here? I want to stop feeling so frustrated, and I also want to know whether I should carry on offering resources to these colleagues who don't share with me. You're sweet. You said, when I came into teaching, I always had the idea that it would be great. In other words, you pictured that it would be all idealistic and essentially loving, which is real love. In other words, you thought the world would be more unconditionally loving, which is very sweet. But then it wasn't reciprocated in the real world. So you then discovered that the world is mostly run on imitation love, where scores are kept and competition is the rule. So you feel betrayed, which is really natural. And there's a real temptation on your part to jump on the field of death where everybody else is playing and be just like them. Oh, please don't do that, because then you'll be dead just like them. So what you do is take a deep breath and sit back and realize that they're playing on the field of death, and they are withholding, and what they're doing is wrong, and they are keeping score, and it's wrong to withhold like they're doing. But the consequence of what they're doing is simply being unhappy. Well, you can't make them happy, and you can't make them change their choices. All you can do is decide whether you're going to make the choice they've made and be like them, which is selfish and stingy and miserable, or you can make the choice that you're willing to share everything you have, even though they don't. I know, I get it. And the reward for your making that choice is that you'll simply be happy. Now, will you be rewarded with lesson plans? No. Will you be rewarded with people who acknowledge you, the teachers, and say, why, thank you. Well, that's just really wonderful of you. Most of the time, no. Although occasionally that might happen. Will you be rewarded by the kids who entirely appreciate what you're doing? Most of the time, probably not. Although some of the kids will. The more unconditionally loving you are, the more you will see the faces of your kids light up as they see that you really care about them. And in the end, you're always happier as you're loving. So you win. You change the world immediately around you as you are an unconditionally loving person. It can't help but work that way. It just does. So, yeah, I know. It isn't fair on the surface, but it really is fair. Because the balance sheet is that when you're loving, you're rewarded with happiness. That's really the promise. The promise isn't that if you're loving, you'll get imitation love in the form of praise. So it really is fair, see? I promise, you'll be happy if you continue to share with these ungrateful stinkers. You'll be happy that you did it. Just do it. Here's somebody who says, my roof has leaks that I detected 4 months ago. It's under warranty, and I've been struggling with the roofer who doesn't return my calls. So finally, I'm deciding to file a legal case against them. I get agitated about it, but I remember what you told me recently, that in a similar situation, you would do it. You would file a case as if you were just picking an item from a menu. I'm trying to keep that attitude. Now, just to explain, I don't remember saying that exactly, but I would have said something like that. In other words, to do it just like a task to be accomplished, without attitude, with as much emotional attitude as though you were picking an item from a restaurant menu. Now, before you do that, before you file a legal case, I would suggest that you leave a message on the roofer's answering machine explaining, saying, look, I would really just like to have the roof fixed, which could be a potentially easy thing to do. If I don't get an answer by, and you name the date and time, then I will file suit, which will be expensive because then I will file for recovery of legal costs and damage that was caused by the roof not being repaired. That will be very expensive. So it would be so much easier if you would just come over and repair the roof. And you say it without being angry. If you're angry, people just run from anger. So I would appreciate it if you'd come over and do this before it becomes very expensive for both of us. And then give him the date and time, and then see what happens. Then I would also mention that you are recording the call for legal purposes. All of these things serve to let the guy know that you're not kidding and that there's a time limit involved. Then you wait until the time limit comes, and then supposing that this leak isn't causing actual damage to your house, then write the roofer a letter explaining the same thing, that there's a time limit, that you're going to file the suit, and then you file the suit. Then you continue. But once you file a case, how you approach it. Now there's a vested interest to win, correct? But many things can go wrong, such as the roofer may file for bankruptcy, the judge may be in a bad mood that day, my lawyer screws up, the whole thing may end up costing me too much, or the roofer may suddenly decide to fix it, but deliberately does a bad job out of anger, and that takes me a lot of time and money to get it fixed, right? So I end up being victimized again. How do you deal with that? Hey, honey, we all get victimized by people every day of our lives. Anytime somebody isn't considerate, thoughtful, and sweet and loving to us, they're victimizing us. This is just, in the same way that it's going to rain. I mean, you walk outside and it rains on you. You're being victimized. But it's our choice whether we feel victimized. So, what do you do when it's the same answer I'd give you if you called me and said, what do I do if it rains? Open your umbrella. You just take the next step. What do you do if you get a flat tire? Stop and take the spare out of your trunk. You just take the next step. Bad things can always happen. I had a leak in my roof recently. Really, I'm not making this up. And the guy who put the roof on that particular section of the building, I did the mental assessment as to the likelihood that I would recover costs and said it isn't going to happen. And so I went out and I did the repair myself. I hate doing home repairs. Hate it. Went out, found the leak, found the place, went out and fixed the spot, put a patch on there, got back down the next time it rained. It was still leaking. So I had fixed the hole, but there was another one. So I got to go and do it again. Anyway, the second time turns out I'd fixed the hole. Was it inconvenient? Yeah, it really was. And I really don't like doing home repairs, like a lot. But what else am I going to do? I could sit around and gripe about it and whine about it and write everybody I know and complain and hate it, or just go do it. So you just compute the relative cost to you and make a decision. Brief story. This is from a mother of 2 teenage daughters. We'll call them older and younger. The mother's husband had an affair with the teenage friend of one of the 2 daughters a couple of years ago, which was most unpleasant for everybody. And so the husband had an affair with the friend of the 2 teenage daughters. And after that ended, he had an affair with one of the girls' school teachers. Then actually got a job teaching at their school while still having an affair with the teacher. So the father invaded his daughters' lives in about as many sick ways as you could, other than incest. And the daughters declared themselves completely out of his life, which lasted for more than a year. He tried to get the courts to make the girls see him, even get counseling, but the courts wouldn't comply. So he resorted to begging the girls to see him. So here's the father whose daughters have said, go stick your head in the toilet. Now back to the mother's account. The father would wait out under a lamp post across the street from our house on Sundays at 3 p.m. for 15 minutes and did this for weeks. Then finally the younger daughter went and sat in his truck with him for 2 hours in the rain. She said that it felt good to let her anger go. And let me briefly pause and say, I actually suggested that she do that. No matter how stupid somebody has been, if we harbor anger against that person, we end up just poisoning ourselves. So I actually suggested, it had been a couple of years since he'd been an idiot, that she go and meet with him and learn to get over her anger. So yesterday, the mother continues, younger daughter spent 4 hours at his house, and when she came home, she shared the fun experiences that she'd had being part of his new family, including playing with his new partner's children. Before bed, older daughter came to me saying that she was having trouble not thinking of younger daughter as a traitor. She couldn't understand why her sister would want to be with her father. And I offered my perspective, but she reminded me that younger daughter didn't know all of the things that father had done. For example, she told me that she and her father used to drive, back and forth between home and this other place for an hour each way. And older daughter told me that father used to spend his time, telling older daughter how awful I, the mother, was. And older daughter would come home each week just frustrated that, that the father had kept older daughter in the car as essentially a captive, asking the older daughter to essentially be a therapist and hear all these terrible things. So anyway, she's frustrated, the older daughter, that here the younger daughter is now being a traitor and going and spending time with the father and his new partner and not holding a grudge like the older daughter is doing. And she doesn't understand how the younger daughter could possibly be forgiving him. She wants the younger daughter to hate her father like the older daughter is doing. And she also says that she's concerned that father will somehow hurt the younger daughter. And that might happen. The older daughter says that the father hurts everybody that comes into his life, and he's taken one teenage love affair and thrown her away, and hurts everybody else, and he's afraid that she's afraid that the father's going to hurt now this younger daughter, and that might happen. But the only thing that's going to heal this family is being loving. And so if this younger daughter can spend some time, being with her father and can learn to be forgiving and understanding toward him, it's love is going to be the solution, and hating him is never going to be the solution. So the worst thing that could happen would be for you, the mother, to perpetuate the hate, and it doesn't sound like you're doing that, so that's wonderful. Then you continue. Since my old pattern is to try to control things, I'm in more of an observer role now. Is there something you could see for me to do, or just keep loving them? Well, your younger daughter's going to be fine. She doesn't need to be protected. She's expanding the love in her life, and she's made a decision to love her dad. That's just outstanding. So what can you do with the older daughter? You just keep doing what you've been doing, which is to explain to the older daughter that her dad was an idiot, and that's not talking bad about him. It's just explaining his behavior. I mean, here was her father having an affair with one of her own friends, a teenager, and then another affair while the two of you were married. And then going, while he's having the affair, and working at the school where she's a student with, no consideration for what other people were going to be saying about her with all the gossip at all. And so just explained to her that her father was empty and afraid and acting like a child and wasn't thinking about her, and that it wasn't about her. He was just taking care of his own emptiness and fear. And then explaining to her what you have explained to both of them already, that the sooner that she can make a decision that she's going to set down her need for vengeance, the happier she'll be. But that you don't have a timetable about it. You're not pushing her to go ahead and do that. But that she also needs to let go of her need for her sister to be on her side. So here she is concerned that her father is going to hurt her younger sister, but actually by her pushing her younger sister to be on her side, she's probably causing more harm to her younger sister than her father would be right now. Nobody needs to be pushing anybody to do anything. So younger sister just needs to be allowed to go visit her father, and older sister needs to be just allowed to have her little moment of vengeance and hate for as long as that takes to burn out. And you just need to watch the whole thing and love both of them where they are, and express understanding of both of them, and express understanding of Dad. Even when you say, hey, Dad was just being foolish, or whatever term you use for it, and say that, also express that he's doing his best. And express a hope that through all of this, and even in his new relationship with this new woman, you hope that he'll learn what unconditional love is, and that he's doing his best to love his daughters. You know, what his daughters really need is his love. And even though he's been pretty foolish in having these affairs, what they really care about most is whether he loves them. So you're doing good. Just love your daughters and teach them, and that's what's going to heal them better than anything, and that will carry them through all their father's foolishness. And as usual, It's always about real love, isn't it? And with that message, I look forward to seeing all of you in a week. So we'll see you next Tuesday. See you then.